Richard, thank you very much for agreeing to have this discussion. In one sense, I suppose, we're old comrades in arms because we've collaborated on various responses to naive young Earth creationists. Would you like to say anything about that from the sort of Anglican
Well,
point
I
of view?
find it absolutely extraordinary that this kind of creationism is coming in at this stage of the 21st century. When I think that shortly after that famous debate in Oxford with my predecessor Samuel Wilberforce, Frederick Temple, who was later to become Archbishop of Canterbury, gave a lecture in Oxford, and he said, God doesn't just make the world, he does something much more wonderful. He makes the world make itself.
Yes.
And historians of science say that it was amazing how quickly the thinking Christian public in Britain actually took on board the theory of evolution, so that by the 1870s or 1880s it was no real problem to most thoughtful Christians. And it's extraordinary at this stage, you know, coming over from America, we get this creation. It's really baffling.
Yes, well, I agree, of course. But is there a sense in which they are sort of being true to their scriptures in a way that you're not? I mean, you've moved on from that, and might they say, well, we're the only ones who are carrying on the true tradition?
Well, it is true that until biblical criticism came in from Germany in the 1830s or 1840s, the church took a very literalistic view of the scriptures. They thought that the scriptures were science as well as history and geography and everything else. But we now know different from that. And what I would say, and I think most Christians would now want to say, that actually the Bible doesn't give us science. It gives us the science of particular ages. What it gives us is an ultimate meaning and purpose, or a purported meaning and purpose for things. In other words, in terms of creation, however the world came into existence, everything is ultimately dependent upon a ground of being, a power, an uncreated source of all existence. One may or may not believe that, but that is the fundamental meaning of those early wonderful chapters in the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
There's, from my point of view, absolutely no incompatibility at all.
Yes. Can I turn to morality and ethics? I know that recently in the House of Lords you've been very active in the debate about euthanasia. To me, it sounds as though your position is what might be called an absolutist one on this. I know you're very liberal on all sorts of other things. As though you're taking an absolutist stand on human life. Would that be fair?
Well, it's a wee bit more nuanced than that. There is a famous conundrum called the policeman's dilemma. A driver is in a cab of a burning lorry. He's about to die in agony, and a policeman comes along. Should he shoot him so to keep him from burning to death in absolute agony? I would say yes, because I don't believe there are any exceptionalist rules. There are extreme examples, boundary situations, which are exceptions, but I don't believe that those exceptions should be legislated for. They are by their very nature exceptions, and I don't think you can draw great kind of long-term legal principles and rules from them. So that's one of the reasons why I'm opposed. There are all sorts of other reasons, because I'm very concerned about palliative care and enough good palliative care getting in place all over the country, about research into palliative care. Now, I absolutely accept there are still at the moment a few really agonizing situations. I accept that. I also accept that if I was in that situation, I don't know how I would act. You could never quite predict. But what really worries me at the moment is, as it were, prioritizing the value of human autonomy over every other value. People who stress the value of human autonomy say it is the person's individual choice at all times and all places which must take the priority. Now, I think that's a very kind of 17th, 18th century Western European view of what it is to be a human being, stressing the individual as an isolated, anguished individual making these great, big, heroic choices. I want to say to be a human being is to be bound up with other human beings, is to be interdependent with other human beings, and that when we're dependent upon other human beings, we don't lose our value. We may not be able to make many choices, but we're still of value as human beings. So that's the philosophical basis for the drive for assisted suicide or euthanasia does worry me in the way it prioritises human autonomy over every other consideration.
And that's interesting, because I would have thought in a way the opposite could be said, that the opposition, which it sounds as though you're not a simple member of, prioritises the sort of sacredness of human life, which clearly from your example of the lorry driver in the cab,
I don't think human life is always absolute. I don't take that view. I mean, an obvious example, I'm not a pacifist. I mean, I think it's right sometimes to go to use arms in order to defend other people. So I don't make human life an absolute in that sense. Now, I know there are religious people who say, well, it's God who causes us to be born, and it's only God who should take our life away at the end. I don't actually take.
You're not one of them.
I'm not. I don't know. I think my argument, it actually stands up in secular, rational terms. It always it very much annoyed me in the House of Lords in the debate, where the people who are pro-euthanasia tried to say that all the arguments were really by religious people on religious grounds. That is not my worry. Real worry is this stressing of human autonomy. And you see, I think that we are dependent for a lot of our life. When we're in the womb, when we're children, perhaps when we're sick towards the end, we're dependent upon other people. And I also worry, this is another point which is difficult to make, and I'm not sure I've ever made it clearly enough, and it may not be totally convincing. But if a person is in extreme distress and they're asking to die, and you give them a means to die, or you actually administer something yourself to hasten them away, what kind of message is that conveying to them? Now, I know that the motivation can be totally right. You can say, I totally believe that people can be beautifully motivated to put that person out of that agony. But if you actually accede to that request, is there something more than that being actually conveyed by the very action, as though you're kind of hastening them out of the here and now? How do they receive that message? That's what worries me.
I want to move on from this, but just one more point I'd like to put to you, which actually comes from Lala, my wife, whose mother committed suicide.
Yes.
And she's very clear that her mother would not have committed suicide if she had known that when the time came for her to really want to die, a doctor would have been allowed to do it. So she, as it were, preempted.
Right.
She killed herself long before she actually really wanted to, because she wanted to kill herself before she became incapable, before she lost, in other words, the autonomy that you're talking about. And this is sort of paradoxical, because it kind of means that if doctors were allowed to assist suicide, people would probably commit suicide less. And that's a paradox which people need to face up to, I think.
Well, I mean, obviously I respect what Lala has said in the example of her own mother. But you see, I think that palliative care has improved hugely over the last 10 or 20 years, and it needs to improve more. And I really think that we can get to the situation where people need not be in extreme distress when they die, and that we could have good palliative care all over the country. I mean, it's the experience of good hospices, for example, that actually, when people have been there for a bit and they feel cared for, looked after, and their pain is kept under control, as it can be by proper administration of the right drugs at the right time, actually they don't ask to die. So that's what I would, and you see, I think if we legislate for euthanasia, it could stop people putting the right kind of motivation and the right kind of resources into good palliative care.
I can see that. Well, I hope you're right about that. All I can say is when my time comes, I shall have myself declared an animal and go to the vet.